Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demon Land podcast. My name is Andy, and I think I'm starting to believe. I admit I was still watching the match from behind the couch, nervously peeking around the side, praying to the footy gods. But this team does not seem to need the help from divine beings. This team is clutching destiny in their own hands, and beware the team that attempts to pry it from their grip. Joining me tonight, long-time Demon Lander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Demon Landers. Another win for the side, and the big question for all the fans out there is how are we going to possibly survive the next 2 weeks waiting for another dose of success?
Yeah, I know. This 2-week wait, it's something we're not familiar with. I think in 2000 we did that. We got straight into preliminary off the first week, but it's quite unfamiliar territory. And, you know, I don't know whether I like it. Maybe the continuity is a good thing. It's not like we needed time for injuries and all that to sort of play out. So I don't know. We'll talk about this a bit later on and talk about our feelings on what we think about the potential for there to be a break or not to be another break before a grand final. But we'll take it 1 week at a time. But we'll talk about it a bit later. Also joining us tonight, Big Man. Good evening, Big Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demon Landers. And here we are, week 2 of finals, and no game this weekend for us.
No game. So I guess tonight we'll talk about this week's game. We'll talk about the All-Australian and we'll talk about the Rising Star stuff, but we won't do a preview of the next match because, one, we don't know who we're going to play. And I guess next week we can have a show where we can preview the upcoming preliminary final. But what do you say we get stuck into talking about this week's game? And before we talk about some individual efforts, the first quarter shootout, it did have me a little bit worried about whether we would be able to match the best offensive team in the competition's firepower. And despite us being able to score quite freely in that opening term, our opposition seemed to have every answer, and I thought they were able to score a lot easier than us, particularly when the ball hit the deck. Charlie Cameron had 3 at quarter time. I was worried, and I, with my MFCSS veil of negativity, thought it would only be a matter of time before the floodgates opened. George, how did you see the first quarter playing out?
The first quarter wasn't it a great game of football if you just were a neutral observer of this? You know, Team 1 in the competition and Team 4 in the competition, both highly talented players throughout the whole ground, great midfields, and we got exactly what we expected with, and this is typical of finals. They're rarely easy wins for teams. They're usually knock them down, drag them out sort of arrangements, and certainly that first quarter was all set up for that sort of outcome. I think it was important for a start off to remember that they'd had a lot of rain prior to the match. I think it was Langdon was talking about it before, that in the warm-ups they were being absolutely belted. So the ground was wet and slippery. Surprisingly, that didn't seem to affect them all that much because with 9 goals scored between the two teams in the first quarter, normally you'd expect a bit more of a slog in the way the game was played. However, surprisingly as well, that's a style of play that Brisbane normally require. And that's how they've got their success. It's about winning the ball in the middle, getting goals quickly from out of the middle, and they were off to a good start, even though we first scored the first goal courtesy of Ben Brown, snapping beautifully from the front like he was a rover. But it went sort of goal for goal through most of the game, through most of that quarter. Charlie Cameron got off the leash 3 times in the quarter, and kept them well and truly in the game. And even though the ball, he was getting the ball from from crumbing. I think there was a little bit of weakness in the back line. But at about the 20-minute mark, I thought the back line have re-established themselves. All of a sudden, we started to see the usual players getting their hands on the ball, the lever marks. May was covering Danaher off beautifully. Salem was getting the ball out wide. Jake Bowie was throwing in his best efforts as well. They just seemed to get over that initial nervousness, which you could sort of expect given that we had 9 players in that side were playing their first final, and a lot depended on this game as well. But yeah, about that 20-minute mark, we suddenly seemed to, we just got all the systems back in place again. And while the scoreline was only marginally a goal either way come the end of the quarter, surprisingly, when you look back at a couple of the statistics from that, like, for example, Brisbane only managed four marks in total for the quarter up to the 15-minute mark, 4 marks in 15 minutes of play. That's not how they needed to play to win the game. It was all about trying to get the ball forward. Importantly, Danaher got, I think, his only mark inside 50 in that first quarter, and May completely blanketed him for the rest of the game. All his remaining marks were up the ground. So our structures were working. Theirs were already starting to struggle, and I think we saw the results of that in the second term, and Binman and Andy will probably talk a little bit more about that.
Before Binman, I'll get you to say your piece. I thought our defence held up, as you said, really well. Well, they've held up really well this year, as evidenced by number one standing as the best defensive team in the competition. However, I think there is a weakness, a chink in the armour, if you will, for me, and that's on the ground rather than in the air. Does this worry you guys for a potential matchup against Port, who have a lot of those small, crafty sort of forwards or mids that can go forward and pick the ball off the deck, or against maybe even the Cats if we come up against them, or the Giants with potentially one of the best smalls forwards in the league. B-Man?
Worry is probably not overly. I was thinking about it actually a couple of days ago. I think it's our defensive weakness since Jets. Since 2018, when Jets was at his best, we've lacked that sort of really genuine small crummer, ground ball get defender who can take one of their smalls. I think it's still an area of potential weakness for us. Bowie's not really a that sort of defender. He's more a halfback flanker in the Salem mould. So it does worry a little bit. If you look at who kicks goals against us, it's medium forwards really is who gets us. But sort of I was reflecting a little bit on that. As George said, they only took how many marks inside 50 did you say they took for the match, George? 2?
For the match, they only took 2.
2 for...
five for the match.
5 for them, yeah.
Yeah, for the whole match, and 2 contested marks in the whole match.
So I was thinking about that and thinking, well, if the opposition bigs, talls don't mark the ball in our forward line, I mean, it sort of logic would suggest if the opposition are going to score goals, it's going to be the medium-sized crumbing players who are going to get them. So I think they're always the sorts of goal that we struggle against, but maybe, that's just a given. And it comes down to winning those contested ground ball gets when the ball does hit the ground. And I guess it's helped when you've pressed up and you've got your defenders and your wingers and your half forwards who have pressed up into the defensive zone to win some of those balls. But yeah, I think it is an area. I wouldn't say an Achilles heel's probably overstating it as well, but it's something I think that we've lacked since Jets. But, I wonder whether... maybe that there's not really a role for that and you give them up. So it's interesting because they score a lot of their goals from ground ball gets in their forward line. Brisbane, obviously, they play high too. Their forwards play high to create that space in behind them to allow Cameron to run into, which he did. And I think I read that they're the highest number of goals scored within 30 metres. And I think that's probably a function of that. So, not a major worry. And it's a bit like with Cameron, that he kicked 5 goals, had a great game. But if the team only scores 8 or 9 goals, then they're not going to be too fussed. It's a bit the same with Neil getting 46 possessions. If he's not hurting you and the team's still looking like going to win, is that such an issue for them? And clearly it wasn't a huge issue for them because they only made really the one change. Smith was on Cameron most of the night. I think May had him at one point. But I think they were pretty comfortable with the role Smith played on him.
I think that's important to recognise as well, that you're not going to stop a player like Cameron, particularly when they've got an on night. It's the same as other opposition clubs struggle against Pickett. They're just going to get off the leash at some size. They're just so brilliant as players. So the fact that while Charlie Cameron kicked 5 goals, the rest of his teammates could only manage 4. So if you want to be successful in finals, you've got to have more than just one player performing. And I think that's more Brisbane's problem rather than worrying about our defence.
Yeah, and it's a bit like the sort of Pagan's paddock for Clarry is that, as I said, that if you're pushing your forwards up high to create space for your, and it's not just him, Bailey and others to run onto, they got all of their goals in that first quarter exactly that way, didn't they? All 4 ground ball gets within 30 metres of goal. Not all of them were that sort of goal where there's space out the back, but at least a couple of Cameron's goal were like that. That's all very well, but it's you've got your half forward, your tall forwards up on the half forward flank where they're not going to kick a goal from. So you really need your smalls to be kicking goals. And I wasn't too fussed in that first quarter because it felt I totally agree. It was probably the best quarter of footy I've seen Melbourne, like in terms of an enjoyable game of footy. It was a great first quarter. Both teams seemed on. We seemed pretty clean with our possession. In fact, that was a big factor. I thought our possession was up around the 70 or 80 for much of that quarter, whereas our disposal efficiency, I should say, and it was better than theirs. So it felt like actually we were on top despite those goals, which is often seems to be the case. We give up our goals early and then we don't give up many from that point on. And it was another night where exactly that happened. And that's probably to be expected because the opposition are at their freshest, aren't they? And so, that's their go. That's where they get a lot of their goals, from those contested possessions inside, from clearances. So I thought they were all against the run of play. So halfway through that quarter, the first quarter, we had 10 post-clearance contested possessions to just 4 for them, and we recorded 19 of the first 25 uncontested possessions for that match at about that 11-minute mark. So, we were on top. We were both running hard to go create space and link up and use those uncontested possessions, which is something they like to do, is to chip it around and hold the ball. And we were smashing them, most importantly, in the post-clearance contested possessions. And we ended up, that was a theme for the whole night. We smashed them in, I think we're up by 25 contested possessions or something by the end of the night, something like that. So it felt, even though the scores were level, my sense was that we were well on top.
If you mentioned Lockie Neal's 46 possessions, Charlie Cameron's 5 goals. If you hadn't seen the match and you had just told me about that, and Lockie Neal 46 possessions, Charlie Cameron 5 goals, I would have thought we'd have been the team to have lost by 5 or 6 goals, not the team to win by 5 or 6 goals. So, yeah, I guess a lot of Lockie Neal's possessions probably weren't effective. I think he was kicking them up in the air a lot. A lot of them were intercepted. So, yeah, you can have 46 possessions, but if they're not going anywhere, there's not much use to them. We were able to not only wrestle control of the game into our favour in the second quarter, we almost, and we probably should have put the result beyond doubt at halftime, but a familiar aspect of our game began to creep in the form of our poor set shot kicking. Tom McDonald, Ed Langdon, Luke Jackson missed easily gettable goals. Jackson's second wasn't so easy, but Track missed 2 on the run, 2 gettable goals, the type that would just crush the opposition's spirit if he'd kicked them. We've kicked 4 goals, 6 for the quarter, and went into the break 30 points up. Realistically, we should have been over 40 points up, if not more. If the game is close to those set shots, are going to cost you, particularly if you allow the opposition to get a few goals and they get a sniff. B-Man, you want to take us through the second quarter? We sort of really dismantled them. And as I said, if not for our poor set shot kicking, we would have been further in front.
Yeah, sure. Just on that first quarter, as I said, I think the scoreline suggested we were close, but an 8-point lead in that context, particularly given, how many times do you think we've been in front this season at the end of the first quarter? Wouldn't be 50% of the time, would it?
Yeah, no, I don't have the in front of me.
So for us, it's unusual. We're slow starters. So to be up, I think, was a real plus. The other thing, I don't know whether they changed this after quarter time, but it seemed to me that in that first quarter, they made a conscious effort. Brown spent a lot of time outside the forward line, really dragged Andrews along with him, coming back from a hamstring. I thought that was a really clever bit of coaching. He got up the ground a lot, Brown, and really ran, made sure Andrews was running hard, and they seemed actually to switch it more often than they have, and I think even the commentators noted that. We so often go down the one wing. They seem to open up the ground a little bit, a bit more than they did for the rest of the match, actually. And I wonder whether that was a conscious tactical thing to again spread Brisbane, but create some sort of challenges for them aerobically and really get them running, because that's an area for them that they struggle, is their pace across the ground. And it just felt like they were looking to really spread that game, which might be why we had an unusually high, for us, uncontested possession thing, to get them chasing, to get them on the bit a little bit. And just the other thing that in that first quarter, you got 2 inside 50s, Christian Petracca, and in doing so, only became the 8th player in AFL history to record 150 inside 50s for a season. The only Melbourne player to do it at all, and the first player to do it since Dane Zorko in 2019. So that's amazing, isn't it, that 150 inside 50s. We'll talk about Oliver later, but he was really on his game, Petracca, in terms of driving his inside 50 again. He was terrific. So for me, the second quarter, the other thing about the first quarter, it has to be noted how big out McStay was for them. That was
huge, and that's part of it. That's part of our luck that you've been talking about.
Yeah, it was clear immediately that he wasn't going to play any more part in that game, wasn't it? So, and for a team that already has lost Hipwood, their best forward, to suddenly have their best marking forward out. I thought that was terrible luck for them. It was early in the game, I think only the 6-minute mark. And unfortunately for us, didn't do anything but brought on that little pest, Reith Matheson. So, but yeah, that was obviously a big part of the game. In the second game, I think that in the second quarter, I should say, for me, it felt like a continuation of that first quarter. And again, using that rowing analogy, we really upped our stroke rate, and they just couldn't go with us. And we've done that. I can't recall the other team we did that to, where we really stretched them in that second quarter, and they just ran out. It might have been the West Coast game, actually, where it was at the second quarter we got going in that game, where they just couldn't go with us. And I thought that it was as a dominant, clean quarter as I've seen. I thought the key player really right through that match, but in particular that quarter, was Oliver. I don't recall him ever kicking as well as he did in this game. And in that second quarter, he just took the game sort of by control. And it wasn't as if he was manic or anything. He was just really damaging. With every time he touched the ball, he was super damaging. They just couldn't get any flow. They looked, on the back foot. They couldn't get the ball moving. They couldn't get a contested mark. They couldn't get a contested mark anywhere. We maintained our possession. It was a really sort of impressive quarter, I thought. It was interesting the way they played Neil. I couldn't believe he had 46 possession after the game, but so many of them weren't particularly damaging. So I just thought that that they got going, actually, funnily enough. They recorded 6 of the first 7 clearances, but only scored 1 goal, 1 from those clearances. That was only in the first term. But then in the second term, that's where we got on really on top. So we got 6 of the first 7 clearances. In that second term, we only scored a goal, 1 as well, but that really got the momentum going with us. And it felt for me that the other thing that we really got going was that overlap run. Langdon was running on top of the ground. Oliver was running in front of the contest. If you look at positioning of where Petracca was, he was taking such aggressive spots on the ground. He was ahead of the ball at every opportunity, looking to push forward and to be, someone who they could direct the ball through. We were super clean with I think that's our best kicking performance I can recall for a long, long time. We marking inside 50s. We'd taken at that point, halfway through that quarter or 20-minute mark of that quarter, 10 inside 50 marks were taken. We'd taken 9 of them, and so we were smashing them up forward. And I think that Gorn sort of slowly got on top, although he struggled to get any sort of clear hit outs to advantage. But we also, the other factor was really how well we got the ball transitioning from our half back line. We just got the game looking exactly how Melbourne wanted. That pressure, we were putting them under massive pressure. They couldn't switch, they couldn't transition it, and when they did, they dumped it to us. And when Charlie Spargo got his first goal at the 18-minute mark, that was the 6th goal that we'd got that we'd launched from our defensive half, which is huge. They only got 2 at that point. They'd only had 2, and I don't think they got another one from their defensive half. But that's is one of their strengths. They are one of the best teams in the AFL at bringing it from behind centre and scoring. So we took that away from them, and we just dominated. So to have 6 goals, by 20-minute mark or so, the second quarter from the half-back line is just, that's an elite sort of stat. And I think it sort of was demonstration of how on top we were. And they didn't really have any answers at, what they could do. So, the other thing is that we took our chances when they came. So I thought that that was a big factor. And finally, the biggest sort of, well, perhaps not the biggest, but certainly it was influential, was that after Charlie Cameron had 3 goals and only 7 disposals in the first quarter, he didn't get a disposal in that second quarter. So that was fantastic, I thought, in terms of Smith going to work on him, working hard, sort of running with him to take him out of the game at a time when we were getting on top was a huge turnaround, I thought.
George, anything you want to add about the second?
Not a great deal more. I think the commentators actually hit it on the head when they were talking about Melbourne are just grinding them down in this quarter. And I think there was another stat that I think I heard from the commentators at one point about Lachie Neale, that he'd had 22 or 23 possessions before half time, of which 18 were handballs. So the effectiveness of that sort of player, when you compare him with the effectiveness of Oliver and Petracca, who are driving it deep into the forward line, giving plenty of opportunities, was quite marked. So, yeah, you can get 45 touches and not actually have a great deal of effect on the game, as we all know about people like Tom Mitchell as well. It's about your effectiveness, and that's what we've been talking about previously certainly during this whole season. It's not about clearances out of the middle. It's about effective clearances. It's how you use the ball, where you put the ball. And honestly, in this quarter, if we'd kicked those set shots, I think we'd missed 4 or 5 set shots, definitely. If we'd put those set shots through, we would have been 8 goals up at half time, and they would have been completely demoralised. As it was, we were five goals up coming the end of the second quarter. It just could have been so much more if we'd kicked those straight. I hope it doesn't come back to bite us at a later stage.
Just picking up that point, George, about the damaging. If they get clearances, they're of not great value when they're not damaging. And 2 stats that really in that first half really showed our dominance is we had 18 more contested possessions than the Lions at halftime, and I think the only time that was only second to the game against the Hawks in terms of halftime differential. So to bring that heat in a final at halftime, to be up 18 clearances against a team who are, every bit the equal of us in terms of contested possessions. In fact, I think we're 1 and they're 2 in the AFL. So to be up 18 in a qualifying final against them at halftime is unbelievable. And that sort of flowed onto the pressure we're able to put on their kickers. So they had 6 players had a kicking efficiency of less than 50, which we probably did too. But for them, the problem was that 3 of those players were Neil, Zorko and Lyons. They're the best centre clear, centre square players and mids. So, that sort of evidence of the pressure we were putting on them. And the sort of related stat was Lever had 11 intercept possessions at halftime, which is incredible. And the only other time was, I think, at some point during the season, Liam Jones had something like that. So it was, I'm pretty sure it was one of the top in the season intercept possessions at in a half of footy. Those factors all together just demonstrate, how far we're ahead. And exactly as George said, if it weren't for our inaccurate kicking, easily could have been 8 goals ahead at half time.
Yes, let's hope this inaccurate kicking doesn't bite us on the bum. It's been talking about it all year, and it's still happening. Let's go into the third quarter. It was a bit of a good old-fashioned arm wrestle, which saw a rare thing happen to this new Demon outfit, and that was being kept goalless. Unfortunately for the D's, the Lions were able to get 2 goals back, and they had whittled our lead down to a reachable 19 points at three-quarter time. George, how'd the third quarter play out, and were you worried that we'd given a team a sniff when it should have been beyond doubt?
We certainly had given them a sniff on the scoreboard, but I don't think we'd given them a sniff anywhere else. We opened up the quarter with a brilliant mark to Ben Brown up forward, and unfortunately from a relatively short distance out, he managed to hit the post. That would have completely broken them right at that stage, because that would have kicked the margin out to 6 goals, and I think we would have seen a completely different result. But look, that almost kept them in the game. They managed to kick 2 goals in the quarter, and while we didn't kick anything, the ball, I looked at the replay today, the ball just bounced back from the half-back line for both sides, back and forward, from one end of the ground to the other. Didn't actually get past that sort of 50-metre arc at either end for most of the game, for most of that quarter. It was what you expect in finals. At some stage, it's just going to be a hard slog and a hard physical contest, and you've just got to keep going, and one team might get broken or the other might get broken. And I suspect in this third quarter, while we didn't break them, it certainly opened the door for the fourth quarter, where we did eventually break them open. But the players just kept doing their roles, kept doing what they were required to do, and they only managed to get 2 goals out of that whole quarter. So I think the only genuine one that was a concern was where McCluggage was left all on his own at about 35 metres out after Berry kicked the ball into him, and there was no one on him. So just a slight failure at that point. But for the rest of the quarter, really, we had control of it, even though we weren't allowing them to do very much with what their opportunities were. We weren't taking ours up the other end, unfortunately. Like I said, if Brown had opened the scoring early on, I suspect they would have been broken. And talking about breaking, I think the highlight of that particular quarter was Luke Jackson's teeth, which he left them on the ground. I really liked the look of his replacement mouth guard, and it's a pity he didn't wear it in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I was saying to you, George, before, I cannot believe players do not wear mouth guards. I noticed Max, I noticed Clarry, they don't wear mouth guards. I think it's crazy not to, and obviously Luke Jackson doesn't either.
Especially him, he's already lost one. So, and it wasn't even the one he lost, wasn't the one, his fake one.
Yeah, and certainly in my experience, it's not the going in, into the pack and being crunched and all that sort of thing. It's always some innocuous thing, exactly like Jackson's, that causes it to happen. And it's simply beyond me as to why players play without a mouth guard. But
twofold as well. He's lost his tooth, but he spent a lot of time off the ground. If he had a mouth guard on, he might have been a bit dazed or whatever, and come back on. It's sort of wasting time. And Max needs the chop out, and yeah.
Yep, yeah, and the worst thing for him is he's now got to front up to his mum and explain why he didn't.
Lucky he's in quarantine for a couple of weeks.
For me, that third quarter was just classic Melbourne, the way we've played this year. We get that lead and we hold it, and it's like we're happy for that range, that 3-4 goal range. It was the first time they got a back-to-back goal in that quarter since the first quarter. It felt like an arm wrestle. We it was interesting. We didn't get a goal ourselves. We had a shot on the siren, didn't we? Where
Fritsch, yeah.
Britta, yeah. But it's just, again, it's sort of how often this season have we had that situation where the opposition's had the momentum. All praise to the Lions. I thought they threw everything at the Ds. They levelled up the contested possessions. The clearance stats were level. It didn't help having Jackson off for 10 minutes because it meant that Maxi had to ruck for that whole period. So I don't think that was, that wasn't a small thing. He went off at the 23-minute mark. There's still 8-9 minutes to go at that point. So that was, he was off for a fair while. So that would have mucked around with their sort of the interchange stuff. But I thought it was a really entertaining quarter in the sense that Brisbane, like you said, George, it's a final, and credit to Brisbane where it's due. They threw everything at the Ds. It's just how good we are at just absorbing that pressure and taking away the momentum, like absorbing the momentum and not getting hurt. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, even last year, team gets a run on. That we were talking about it on the podcast all the time. Our inability to stop the opposition kicking 3-4 goals in a short burst. We've completely eliminated that. So much so that it's a surprise that it was such an outlier seeing Geelong do that to us. It's just seemed like such an unusual event. And in the same way, George, that. I know the one you mean where McCluggage was left by himself and the players were all standing around going, who is that? And in a way it was the same sort of thing. It stood out because how rare it is this season for there to be any sort of defensive breakdown where someone's supposed to be on someone and isn't. So I thought it was, again, it's sort of the second quarter is the one which obviously attracts the attention. We were great. That's where we set the game up. But really you could argue it's the third quarter that, made sure that we went on to win that game because we absorbed everything that they could throw at us. We weathered that storm. And as George said, we were able to come out and, you just knew that last quarter was going to get away from them, that they'd fired their best shot, a bit like West Coast in that game. That West Coast fired their best shot and, that's it. They didn't have anything more left to fire. So, another impressive defensive quarter. I've listened to RSN on the Monday footy wrap that I've talked about a bit. And Adam White is really interesting. He hasn't rated Melbourne all season. He's been talking us down the last 2-3 weeks, so much so that he tipped the Lions. He thought they were going to win. And when they were reviewing the game this morning, he was basically pumping them up still, saying, well, look, they were great in the first quarter. They went with Melbourne. And if you took out the second quarter, well, they were level with Melbourne, and he kept on saying, he said it a number of times, and you have to give them credit. They played better in the third quarter. And I just thought it was a wrong read on the game.
Yeah. How can you take away when a dismantling of a team?
Yeah, that's right. So exactly right. I mean, and it sort of, he sounded like a Melbourne player on Demon Land who's got a set against us, who can't quite get it out of his head that we're as good as we are, because he's been talking us down now for weeks, as I said, so much so that he was confident Brisbane were going to beat us. And even in his review of the game, he was using as evidence of the fact that Brisbane actually aren't that far away from us, the third quarter. But listening to him, I was thinking, well, it's just you're obviously not watching enough Melbourne, because it's like we're happy to hold. We're happy to hold a 3-goal lead, and we're under no, we don't. It doesn't seem like they feel this pressure to have to get a goal all the time.
That's ridiculous. He's on my hit list now. Don't like him. We were able to ice the game in the last after some great defensive efforts and forward thrusts. Bailey Fritsch once again proved what a valuable asset he is to the team. He's kicked a goal. He's kicked 2 goals. He's taken a beautiful contested mark that he pulled from thin air, and then Track put the icing on the cake with a bullish snap, and he threaded one through the needle from the boundary. We were able to play out the last 6 or 7 minutes with an all-Australian bench of Gawn, Oliver, Petracca and May. It was a fantastic way to end the game. Big man?
Yeah, I think it was a fantastic way to finish. And again, it was classic Melbourne this season. I think George nailed it. You know, they couldn't go with us. And I don't know about you, Andy, I had no sense at all that they were going to be able to get off the canvas. The only way they were going to be able to is if they could have got that last couple of goals and got it within 6 points. But they looked out on their feet, Brisbane. I thought there was impressive players. I thought Rivers had his best quarter of footy for a long time. He had halfway through, he'd already had 5 intercept possessions. 2 of them set up goals for us, which we hadn't got any of them in the third quarter. We'd got basically no goals from intercepts and half-back flank in the way that we had in the first half, in particular that second quarter. And he got one within that first goal we kicked early was off a Trent Rivers intercept. And he was on Zach Bailey for a fair chunk of time and held him to 3 disposals in a 25-minute block. I think that's from third quarter into the last one. And Rivers in that period got 11 disposals himself and set up 2 goals. So I thought he was terrific, having been a little bit quiet. The other one who was fantastic to see really sort of get some reward for effort. It was Petracca. I thought Petracca was just fantastic. Oliver was the standout player on the night, but Petracca wasn't far behind him. And he sets up he sets up in the middle of the ground a lot, and he's so clean with his marking. To go back and kick that goal from the boundary would have been great for his confidence. It was he hit it sweet. That was a beautiful bit of play where they tic-tacked it down the ground and got ahead of the ball. Classic Melbourne goal. And then he showed how classy he is, the way he read that ball off the pack to snap it. And, that for me was great that he got the reward, but 2, that, it just sort of showed even the last 2 games he hasn't been as influential as he was in this game, that, there's every chance he's going to break out in a prelim and go to an even higher level. So I thought that was fantastic. And we really got going with our, intercepting. So, we just smashed them in the air down back. They couldn't mark the ball. We were getting the ground ball gets. We smashed them in clearances, but most importantly, we smashed them in post-clearance possessions. And we made them look slow again. And remember the first time we played them in that second half, suddenly they looked slow, and we did again. The other thing I thought was brilliant right through the match was I thought Goody had a really good coaching match, and 2 of the things that were really clever is that they completely did what George was saying that we needed to do last week, which was take space away from Rich. All of his kicks were under pressure. We allowed him no space to run into, which is what he wants. He wants to get up the ground and have no one in front of him, be able to steady, take, run for 10 metres and then launch it. We gave him nothing. And, every time he kicked, he was either under pressure, but importantly, he had someone in front of him that he had to kick over the top. And that was a combination. I think Sparrow went to him for a little while. Cozzy did that high pressure running whenever they could from the points. They tried to run really hard. Brown was doing the same thing. So I thought that was a really good execution of the plan. And the other one was the way Brown dragged Andrews around. Just completely opened up that space. And really, Andrews had a horror match, I thought. And part of that was how hard Brown ran. Brown was up again in our high GPS numbers. I thought he had a terrific match. But tactically, that was a really clever move, I thought.
George, anything on the last before we go to individuals?
No, I think that was all well summed up, and we'll talk more about the individuals, I think, who really shone in that last quarter, but that's the nature of teams that win serious finals is you get those stars come out when the games are there for the taking, and certainly Petracca did that, and even Ben Brown, as was mentioned, the work that was being done sort of just below the eyesight level was quite amazing.
Just a couple of other stats from the game that jumped out, Andy, were I think you were saying, George, 5 marks inside their 50. They only got a goal from them. That's just incredible. But what's the important is we got 15 marks inside our 50, and we scored 5 goals, 6 from it. So, that's a huge differential. And the other one was, working our way through the midfield and getting conversion from them. We scored 53 points for midfield intercept possessions, and they only got 3 goals. That's, between those two stats, that's 5 goals that's 9 goals differential. That's sort of 54 points differential just in those two scoring chains alone. And in a way, it told the tale of the match, I thought.
Clayton Oliver, he was just immense once again. 33 possessions, 18 contested, 10 score involvements, 7 inside 50, 36 pressure acts, 3 tackles, 574 metres gained, 1 goal. We love when he hits the scoreboard. He's been doing it the last couple of weeks. This guy's just built for finals footy. His kicking has improved out of sight, as you mentioned earlier, Bimban. Some of those weighted kicks into the forward 50 arc, one to Cozzy and one to Fritsch, were just beautiful. We talked last week about his kicking to handball ratio, and surprisingly this week he had more kicks than handballs, 17 to 16. And I don't have the stats to back me up, but it's not a first, but it'd be extremely rare for him. There's been a consistent downward trend year on year for Clarry, kicking more than handballing. 2016, 70%, 2017, 73%, so slightly higher, but 2018, 64%, 2019, 62%, 2020, 54%, and 2021, 54%. So he's definitely kicking it a lot more. He's still more handballs than kicks, but he's a great handballer as well. So won't take that away from him. But some of those weighted kicks were just beautiful. George?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of factors at play here. Similarly for Petracca, that with the advent of Brown up forward, and we'll talk about him a bit later, all of a sudden we've got a genuine tall target up there that they can just launch if they're in a difficult situation. In past years, we've complained about kicking it to the opposition deep. Well, we didn't have a Ben Brown before. What that has meant is that Oliver and Petracca are playing much further up the ground than what they ever did before. They're actually playing a lot more inside the 50 than what they ever did before. And as a result of it, we're seeing Petracca snapping goals. We're seeing Oliver snapping goals. They were never, ever there at those sort of contests previously. But we were able to get the ball in there and hold it in there these days and create those opportunities that we never had before. Oliver's deep kicking was just fantastic. Like Andy just mentioned, he kicked a beauty to Pickett that he scored a goal from. He hit twice. Twice he hit Fritsch. Fritsch missed the second one, I think, but they were just rippers of kicks straight out of the middle, right to the into the open space for both of them to be able to mark. So he's completely changed with the evolution of his own game, but I think it's not just because Clayton Oliver is a better player than what he was last year or the year before. There's no doubt about that. But it's because the team's playing a slightly different way that enables you to be able to see the best of Clayton Oliver. The same for Petracca, and we'll talk a little bit more about him, but Oliver's it's just exceptional what he's produced in the last couple of weeks.
I couldn't agree more. And that was, as a complete game, it was an incredible game. I mean, he's probably high watermark this year is his game against Adelaide. But for a final, he looked like he was not only on top of his game, he was completely switched on. And for me, the thing about those kicks, I think that's easily the best kicking I've seen him do in terms of how damaging those kicks were. As much as anything, though, it was his decision-making. About making the right decision. And there was one that really summed it up for me, which was must be a set play and it must be something that they drill. But it was the kick to Langdon. Langdon missed it, but Langdon came in. He was on the opposite side of the ground. I think Oliver was on the half-forward flank just outside 50, and the kick normally would be to go, towards the pocket or to a leading forward. I think T-Mac was coming out. He kicked directly across the ground to Langdon, who was leading directly at him, but parallel with the goal face. And it was just a really good vision. Obviously, I presume something they've trained and done, sort of unusual leading pattern because it was, as I said, sort of parallel with the goal face. And two, he put it down low where Langdon basically couldn't miss it. It was to have the vision and the execution and to hit that target. One, technically, it was a beautiful kick, but just the decision-making process, to do all of that quickly, to make that decision rather than go long was just, I thought, indicative of his whole game, and just showed a fella who is, to be making decisions under pressure is the mark of the really good player. And that, the finals player, the ones who stand up, like Martin and, in the finals, the ones that become known for playing well in finals are the ones who make really good decisions and in finals and don't get pressured. I thought he was phenomenal. And if you look at our three mids, our starting mid, Oliver, Petracca, Viney, all were very aggressive in terms of helping the team generate scores. Score involvements, Oliver and Petracca had 10 each, and Jack Viney was the third most with 7, and behind that was Ben Brown with Gawn and Langdon all with 6. So for your three starting mids to top the most score involvements is just unbelievable. To get 27 from those three players is incredible. And I thought that, Oliver, Petracca and Viney all were not just defensively strong, but they were creating havoc. And Oliver also had 7 inside 50s, and Petracca had 8 and Viney 7. So they were getting him inside 50 as well. So incredible game.
Christian Petracca, as bullish as ever, was our tracker, so powerful in the trenches, always seems to have so much more time, even when he's working within a phone box, as one of the commentators mentioned. 30 possessions, 12 contested, 10 score involvements, 8 inside 50s, 21 pressure acts, 700 metres gained, 2 goals which it could have easily been 3 or 4. If there wasn't an Oliver in the team, he's taken the 3 votes, but I think he gets the 2 behind Oliver this week. Just fantastic. Both of them built for finals, and I just love watching them.
And 90% game time too.
Yeah, well, both of them have been playing that 90% most of the year.
Yeah,
or high up there.
It's remarkable, isn't it? But that's exactly the sort of player that you need in finals. You need those bulls, those ones to be able to break the tackles and get through where nobody else can. And we've got one of the best in the competition at the moment in Christian Petracca, and more importantly, he's starting to have some effect on the scoreboard as well, as a result of playing that way. So really, really fantastic, and he's in great form and. Really showing his best, and I was really impressed with his interview last week, where he wanted to embrace the fans and make the fans proud as a result of the way that the team was playing, but he's making us proud the way he's playing alone.
Absolutely. Ed Langdon and Angus Brayshaw on the wings. Shout out to these two. I thought it was one of Gus's best games for the club. I can't remember.
I did too.
I can't remember if they mentioned this during the game or on one of the footy shows since, but neither of them really got sucked into following their man into the congestion of the contest, and they provided the link for us on the outside. And as we're well aware, the opposite has cost us in the previous years when teams have employed that tactic against us in the past when everyone's gone to the honeypot, beats to the honeypot, and teams have been able to get it out. That's sort of the role they play for us. And having 2 very effective wingmen is going to hold us in very good stead going into the business end of these finals, B-Man.
I totally agree. I think that was... a really complete performance from Brayshaw, and I agree. I think one of the best games I've seen him play, and he's been so disciplined. I think it's been a theme this year. How disciplined the whole team's been. And you mentioned, players not getting sucked into the contest. Those two are the perfect example, particularly him, because he's played all his junior footy, famously got third in a Brownlow, which, all because he was a gun inside mid who went and got the footy. Oliver the same. They're just being so disciplined that, it's really noticeable when you start watching it. There was even one example where no one went for the footy because they were allowing the other player. They're only going in one player to the footy, and even Oliver's goals in the Geelong game, they were the ones one of them snapped just because he didn't go to the footy and allowed it. And Brayshaw has been brilliant at it, not getting sucked in towards that channel. And, Bartel calls about keeping the width. And they sort of run parallel to each other as they go down the ground, Brayshaw and Langdon. And, Langdon doesn't get used necessarily, or Brayshaw, but are there. But the sort of the real work for Brayshaw in particular, I think, I'd like to know whether he spends a bit more time in half back in the defensive unit than Langdon does. But he works super hard to get back. I thought his decision-making was terrific. In our metres gain, Petracca topped it, Clayton Oliver next, and then Brayshaw was third ahead of Langdon. So it just shows, they were both getting metres gain. So you've got, both damaging players. He got 536 metres gain, Brayshaw, which is a huge performance, and, 26 disposals. He didn't waste too many. He played most of the game. Langdon played 100% game time, which is just phenomenal.
He's got the tank to do it.
Got the tank, yeah. Don't bring me off. And Brayshaw, but Brayshaw played 86% as well. I agree. I thought he was a real leader's game as well. Often, his decision making was great, and I couldn't have been more impressed with his approach actually.
Totally agree with all of that. I was also going to mention the 100% game time. I don't know how someone can possibly run as hard as Ed Langdon does for the whole game and stay on the ground for the whole game. It's just quite remarkable.
And a lot of it's sprinting as well.
It's not like a slow jog throughout the ground, but he's going hard at it all the time. The other interesting thing I thought was, and we've talked about effectiveness before, but they were on McCluggage and Robinson, and the statistics for both, or for all four players, was pretty similar at the end of the day. But I reckon Langdon and Brayshaw gave their opposition a complete and utter bath during the game simply because of their effectiveness. The commentators came out and said they couldn't believe the positioning of Brayshaw. He just always seemed to be there when he was needed. He was always under the mark when it was needed to be taken. He was always there to throw his weight in when it was required. Langdon was the same out the other side, with the exit strategy. There's always an Ed Langdon out that one side. It's just remarkable. And again, just playing their roles magnificently. But if you just looked at the statistics, you wouldn't have thought there was much difference between them. But I think they gave them a complete and utter pasting.
Yeah, he's not on the run sheet there, Andy, but sort of in a similar vein, in a similar role. I thought Neil Bullen's had an amazing last month or so. He's been just about arguably one of our top 5 players since the bye. He was terrific again with 27 disposals, 14 kicks. He was on the ground 84% time, and he also got. He was involved in 6 score involvement, so right up the top there for that. His disposal efficiency was okay, 77%. So, he's another player like Langdon and like Brayshaw who does so much of that running and so much of that up and down sort of, donkey work, I guess. The other thing that I've been really impressed with Neil Bullen is his decision-making. Has been such an improvement, and he made some excellent decisions in this game where, I think a year ago he would have turned the ball over or tried too much, or he's holding on to it when he needs to. He's making smart decisions on when to pass, and I thought he was terrific.
Yeah, he had his most possessions for the year this year. You don't often see him getting that 27 disposal mark, and I've noticed a lot. This year in particular, he's not. You never see him in the center square bounces, but he's in a lot of the stoppages in that group of 4 at the stoppages. which I don't recall in the past ever sort of seeing him sort of play that role where he's getting involved around the ground at stoppages as a midfielder. But I've noticed it a lot this year. So I don't know if that's trying to get him into the game and to utilise that running that tank that he has. But it's working.
I think it's partly a function in that he's at the footy a lot. So, I mean, you often think of him, Cozzy, and as the three, but really he plays a different role than Cozzy and Spargo. He's up the ground a lot more than those two players. He's almost like a modern version of the old utility position. You know, he's sort of a forward is where he lines up, and he spends obviously a bit of his time there. But you know, he goes where the footy is, and I think that's probably partly explains what you're saying about his involvement in those contested balls.
I'm just having a look at his stats. Like, he's averaging a lot more possessions this year than some of his other years. So, yeah, he's getting a lot of... I mean, that was a criticism we had, that he didn't get a lot of the ball at all. He'd have very low possession games, and this year he's doing that. Jake Lever. I said we'd never, ever mention again the cost of getting Jake Lever to the club, and I won't. 15 intercepts once again. This is the fifth time he has had 15 or more intercepts in a game this season. No other player in the league has done that in more than one match this year. Just remarkable. And it's so good that we've got May and we've got Petty who can play those lockdown roles and just allow Lever to do exactly what we got him into the club for. Just love this guy, big man.
Yeah, he's been fantastic. I mean, obviously all season. He seems to have got so much more. It doesn't seem to have any issue now with his lateral movement. That he seems to be completely over that. He seems also, to my eye anyway, a better mark than he was, better one-on-one.
Yep.
And I heard some discussion around, what do you do against him? And David King on the first crack was saying, well, you just got to run a tag on him. But Antonio made the good point that it's without directly contradicting King, he's sort of was saying it's easier said than done. It was on the back of the discussion about why Geelong just left Adelaide to dominate. But, Montagna pointed out is that you can always send a lever to a tall defender. So, I mean, it's all forward. So I think he's improved one-on-one, and May actually pointed that out in a interview that I heard with him, saying that Lever gets a fair chunk of those intercept marks on a player. It's not like he's out by himself getting easy marks. So I think he's improved one-on-one, which means that, you can send him to a tall, and so what if you put a small on him, he can go to whoever he wants. So they can choose, they can force that, they can break that tag. But yeah, he's incredibly influential for the way we play, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting, isn't it? This was the game set up for Jake Lever. As soon as McStay went off the ground, they just had nothing else to put on a Lever, even if they wanted to. And he fully exploited the situation. But the other thing is that we've got this other bloke down the back nine called Petty who just holds his opponent completely out as well. I think it was probably on Herberry, I think, for a good time. He didn't do anything in the game, of course, but that just, with May holding Danaher down to virtually zero for the whole game. You kicked 1 point for the whole game and took 5 marks, only one of which was a chest mark inside 50. It just leaves Jake Lever all on his own, and you saw how damaging he was, the same as what Aaliyah was against Geelong. And probably every team is looking at those two players at the moment going, we've got to find a way to stop them, because they just control the whole game from that sort of centre-half back position. They're the generals of the attacking moves that come out of there. So, another great game.
As turned out exactly in this match, as I was saying, how many of our goals, I think it's 36 points more from the half-back line. But it was interesting hearing, I heard Aaliyah being interviewed I can't remember if it was on the All-Australian or afterwards, about the way of playing is that he still plays on a tour and uses them as a reference. He can still zone off them. That's the thing. So, and I heard May talk exactly about that with Lever. Is he was asked about, well, how do you stop his influence as the intercept? And the challenge is that he can start, if they want to tag him. I mean, Geelong put Dalhouse on him. Melbourne would have been happy for that. What are you going to do? You tag a defender like what? How do you take him away from how does Dalhouse take Lever away from the footy? Lever can let someone like Dalhouse go. You need to put a tall on him, which is what King was saying. But even then, if Lever reads the ball more quickly than the opposition defender, he can still zone off and intercept mark. And what do you then do? Do you get your tall like a McStay or whoever to play on the other side of the ground? Well, then great, no worries. That means you've got one less forward who can do anything on the scoreboard. So it's really tough for opposition coaches, which is why I think that they don't actually do it that often. It's easier said than done. Let's man up on Lever and stop his influence. But tagging a defender means that you've got a forward doing sweet FA to help the team score. So
yeah, and like Aaliyah, both of them are actually very good marks overhead. They're not the muscling type of marks. They are great at reading the ball in flight and just being there at the right time. They judge the ball. They've got high footy IQ, which not all forwards have. And the reason they get so many intercepts is because they're actually very good high marks. So when Geelong puts someone like Dalhouse on him, you just shake your head. He's never going to be an influence.
Yeah, and the only way to stop those intercept marking players, Lear being one of them, at Lever, is to engineer it somehow that last kick inside 50 is under minimal pressure. Yep. Because then you can weight the ball to the forward's advantage and give them half a chance. But that's, when Melbourne aren't on and not bringing that intense pressure, well, no one's going to intercept mark the way we are. It's all built on that pressure, isn't it, George?
Yeah.
And so that's why I think Geelong's model is flawed for finals, because they're always going to have pressure on that kick inside 50.
If you want to join the show, 0390163666. That's 0390163666, or Skype us at Demonland31. If you give us a call, I'll answer, and just wait till we bring you on. The debutants. So we had 8. I think, George, you said 9, but I'm not sure if you were including Jordan in that tally. Okay, well, 8 sans Jordan. Tom Sparrow, Cozzy Pickett, Trem Rivers, Jake Bowie, Luke Jackson, and, of course, Stephen May and Ed Langdon. But I wanted to focus on the rookies. None of them really looked out of place on the big stage. Rivers had a few shaky moments in the first quarter. When a handball clanger resulted in Cameron's first goal, but he certainly steadied as the game wore on and took some instrumental intercept marks late in the game. He's had 11 intercepts for the game, 10 after quarter time, including 3 intercept marks and 3 score launches. Before I put it on to you guys, I'll mention that my work on providing these stats on the younger brigade are courtesy of a great follow on Twitter, who is an avid D's fan and a listener of the show, Justin Giuliano, who you can follow at JT Giuliano. That's JTGiuliano. Each week he posts some interesting stats, mostly D's related, before games. So give him a follow on Twitter. George Rivers.
Rivers, I don't think you can add any more to that. Those couple of critical intercepts that he did in the last quarter, I think were, if there was a slight chance that Brisbane could come back, he certainly killed it, and then delivered the ball up forward, where we subsequently scored 2 goals from, I think. But 11 intercepts when he was only playing, was it 66% or thereabouts game time? 11 intercepts was just fantastic. Can't want more from him. So I'll leave it with that for him. I'd like to talk about Tom Sparrow when we get around. We'll get to him very shortly. He's such a great mark, Rivers, and such a booming kick. Just love it. B-Man, you want to add anything about him before we move on?
Only that I was going to say exactly the same thing. He's got really clean hands as well, hasn't he? So you've got Petty down there, Rivers who's a really strong mark. Obviously, Lever and May make such a huge difference when you clunk a mark down in the back line. It's really deflating when the opposition do it to us because you made all that work. You've got it inside 50. The opposition mark, and not only do they stop the forward entry, they then can set the game up how they want it moving forward. They've got options to switch it or go down the line or whatever. They've got that time to do it and to get the game sort of back in control. And so it's exactly what happens when we do it. He's another player. I thought his decision making was fantastic, and that's the best game he's played for ages actually.
Harry Petty was a guy I left out in terms of also playing his first final as well. Also looked very well at home. Jake Bowie continues to impress. You wouldn't know he's only played 5 games, let alone his first final. He didn't have huge stats of 15 disposals, 9 contested, 6 intercepts, and 0 losses from 3 contested defensive one-on-ones. But you know what? That was from Justin. But now I'm just remembering. Do you count that as the one he got tackled, and then got and had a free kick against for holding the ball when Bailey had a shot? Bailey tackled him, so not sure if that is counted as defensive one-on-one. So that stat might be wrong. But Bowie, B-Man.
Yeah, I thought actually he was probably, they're interesting, those stats. That sort of indicates a better game than I thought he played. So I haven't watched the replay yet. I've watched the KO mini a number of times. So I thought he was the one player that looked a little bit uncertain, to be honest, particularly in that sort of first quarter. Maybe I'm being a bit tough on him. I thought he had his weakest game, but he's obviously got a very small number of games to, a small pool to choose from there. But I wasn't super convinced by his game actually.
Do you think there's a danger that he might be an unlucky one to sort of make way for a Hibberd in the coming weeks?
No, I don't. No is the short. I think that the issue that we're talking about a couple of weeks ago, that having 2 players that you can run through, meaning that, if they look to shut down Salem, you've got another player who's they can go through to rely on that sort of quarterback style, set it up down the field, is really important. I don't think Salem didn't have a huge game, and so I can't see him coming out of the team. It's certainly not for Hibberd. And there was in that last quarter, Bowie ran through the centre and got on the end of a handball and kicked inside 50. That's what they want him for. He's a beautiful user of the ball. And, as George said a few weeks ago, that's when in the finals, games are won and lost by players who under pressure hit a target, don't turn it over. We'll talk about shots for goal. That's an obvious one for that. But it's really those players who make good decisions but also then execute. And because he's so technically strong, such a good kick, I just can't see them taking him out of the side. I mean, his game wasn't so poor that, and probably better than what I'm suggesting. I just thought he looked a little bit nervous, which is completely understandable given it's his first year of footy.
And I think that's exactly what we've got to keep in mind. He made a couple of errors with the pace of the game in that first quarter, but then he's played 5 games, and this is his first final. It's not unexpected, but the sign of a good player is that they overcome that initial problem and nervousness and come back strong. And like you said, he's not going out of that side with that kicking ability. And it wasn't just in the last quarter. It was just the delivery out of that half back line. He's a big positive to us. And like you said, you shut down Salem. How are you going to shut down Bowie? How are you going to shut down Rivers? These are the future for us as well. But he is a natural footballer who can kick the ball well. That's exactly what we need. So he's not going anywhere.
And the other thing I love about his kicking is that he gets he's low and flat. He doesn't helicopter it. So even though he's only a short fella, and he's probably, he's not the biggest kick. It's not like they're going 60. They go flat and fast. And, as George was talking about, some of the kicks from Oliver, he's got that skill to weight the ball and to put it out to, in front, to the side, behind, wherever it needs to go for the forward's advantage. And partly that's a function of the fact that it doesn't float up in the air. So he gets really good, penetration fast, whereas Rivers he helicopters it a bit and isn't quite as good a kick because of that. I reckon George has a really great point, the fact that he didn't drop his bundle, because he was a bit nervous, and I think that's exactly right. That's what it looked like, a bit about the pace of a final, because it was a high quality, fast, high pressure first quarter, so totally understandable. But I've seen lots of players not be able to get back their confidence, or they're thrown for the whole match and it goes from bad to worse. But that wasn't the case for him at all.
Here's one for you, George. Tom Sparrow, one of his best games for the D's, 21 possessions, 9 contested, 6 score involvements, which was equal 4th highest for the team. These are courtesy of Justin. 22 pressure acts, equal 6th highest for the team. Where do you guys sit on the Sparrow-Jordan? Were you surprised that Sparrow held his spot over the rest of Jordan? Jordan was widely seen as being ahead of Sparrow, but Jordan was rested for the Cats game. But Tom played very well in that Cats game. He took quite a few good marks. He's retained his spot for the Lions game, and now he's played well enough to keep that spot. So where does that leave Jordan? You can talk about Sparrow first, but keep in mind, let's have a chat about Jordan and what his role might be going forward, and whether he can get into the team.
That's one of the great. I think the selection committee's got a whole series of very nice problems, and this is just one of them. When you've got these young players who perform perhaps above expectations and just have that toughness and hardness. We've spoken about Bowie, the same sort of thing. Just natural footballers. They're in there. I was looking at centre bounces during the game. Sparrow is our number 4 at the moment, not James Harms. Sparrow was in 9 centre bounces during the game and was instrumental in a lot of successful clearances out of there. But the fact is, again, he's played 26 games in total and he's playing the number 4 role on the inside. It's not like he's played 100 games. And people will, perhaps not this year, but next year people will be going, where have you been hiding this bloke? He is fantastic in the middle, and
in plain sight.
in plain sight, yeah, exactly, yeah. But he plays almost a similar role to what Viney does. He's tough, he's hard, he's inside, and he's got the body. Even at this very young age, he's got the body that's going to endure in the middle. I think the problem with Jordan is, and there isn't a problem with Jordan, is he's built slightly different. He's more of the outside, talented, skilled user of the ball, so it's difficult to see how the selection committee are going to use it. And I think it's going to be more a case of what the opposition are. With Brisbane, you had the Neils and the Zorkos, all tough, hard, big-bodied midfielders, and we probably needed someone like a Sparrow in there as a backup. Maybe you'll have a different selection depending on who we play in the preliminary final and grand final. Jordan is too skillful to leave out, but just as equally, you don't want someone like Jordan being smashed up by some of the bigger-bodied mids. But, Bin Man's favourite player, Sparrow, looks like he's staying around for a while too.
Captain Jack, he had a great game, didn't he? I mean, that's his best game of AFL footy statistically and by any other measure, really. It's the most kicks he's ever got in a game. I'm just looking at his season career high on Footy Wire at the moment. His career highs are in this match: 21 disposals, 12 kicks, 11 handballs. His marks, where his career high was at the Geelong game last week. Career high goals, he only got one of them against this one. So
kicked a beautiful goal.
Beautiful goal, and I think I was really surprised. I was really surprised that Jordan didn't make to come in for Sparrow. So I think you've probably hit the nail on the head, George, in terms of they wanted his strength at the ball. Like I was just looking at comparing the two. They're both 80 kilos or 83. Sparrow's what footy-wise got him, and James Jordan slightly taller and 80 kilos, but it looks a bit different. And for some reason I had it in my mind that Jordan was a year younger, but they've only got like 2 months, difference between them, 3 months. So, but the same draft, one was pick 33, Jordan, the other one was 27, similar players, Jordan slightly taller. So, they're really very similar in many ways. I think the difference is what you're saying, George, is how physically strong Sparrow is. And so I think that was really probably what was the deciding factor, is that coming into a cutthroat final against a known contested ball team with the sort of players that you're talking about, Zorko and Neil, who love getting in and getting hard, and going at a player like him. I think that they obviously felt that he was up for it, and he repaid him with just a fantastic game. I thought I was really pleased. He's a good decision maker as well. He's a great kick, really good depth. And that goal we kicked, Andy, I was really impressed. If you look at it again, it was a great bit of play. Classic Melbourne, move it quickly. I think someone played on the wing really quickly, turned, rolled and kicked it in. You had, I think, McDonald went up for the mark, predictable. Everyone knew where it was going to be. He was at the fall of the ball, and he ran with it for 10 metres. And if you look at it, he looks inboard to the left-hand side, and I think might even be gone down in the forward pocket or as the option. So his first thought is, who do I share this to? What's the rule? He assessed that it was a better option to go for goal, and he went for goal. And he split the goal, and it was, that was in the first quarter, wasn't it?
That's correct, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and it just kept the momentum going. I think it was directly after a goal they kicked. And so some goals are more important than others. And I just thought in that second, there was just so many positive things. There was the way we moved the ball down the field, the speed with which we did it, the predictability, the front and centre, not, looking to share if that was an option and then making a different decision and then splitting the middle. That was an impressive bit of play from a fella in his first final.
Cozzy Pickett only had the 7 disposals, but he did what I expect of any forward. If they don't get high possession counts, you either hit the scoreboard or you provide pressure in the form of tackles or pressure acts, and neither of the latter were especially high, but he did hit the scoreboard twice, and what a beauty was that first goal. Just absolutely split the middle from a snap. It was beautiful. If you go onto demonland.com, it's a video of the week, and I could watch it 1,000,001 times. George?
Yeah, he did. Again, he did everything that you wanted him to. Like Cameron was for us, he's just a nightmare to try and match up on. You let him off the leash for 5 seconds and he's gone. He's scored. It was just incredible that he had so much room with that first goal that he got. Was really a defensive fail from Brisbane, but the other thing that was important was the pressure that he and a couple of others were bringing to bear on Daniel Rich, particularly with those kick-outs. Just the fact that they're in the face stops Rich being able to deliver to a man, as opposed to Rich having to kick to a contest. So completely, he gets nothing. He gets no credits. He gets no stats for things like that. But in the end, it completely blows apart Brisbane's attacking mode from the back line, particularly after the points. So, yeah, he did exactly what he wanted, and hopefully we'll see some more in the coming games.
Luke Jackson, our finals debutant, and our rising star, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. He didn't have a huge game in terms of numbers, but provided a foil to give Max a chop out in the ruck without us having to rob Peter and pay Paul, which we used to do the last time we played finals when we bring T-Mac or Weed out of the forward line. Probably should have had a goal or two to his name, but I guess hitting both posts with a kick for goal should be worth something. Wasn't that a beauty? I don't think we need to talk more about him. Let's roll on. Joel Smith.
Before Joel Smith, I thought George wanted to speak about Fritter as well, or had we?
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll slide that in there. I was going to talk about it when we talk Tom McDonald, but No, that's all right. Let's talk Fritter. Let's talk forward line. Fritter, what a fantastic year. 51 goals, I think he's kicked now. It's 51-21. So I was a bit worried early on that he'd missed an inaccuracy had come in, but after the year has almost been said and done, he's got a great conversion rate, and I'm sort of quite confident when he's ball in hand, as long as he's not right on the boundary like he was on for that kick on the siren. But what another fantastic game for him. Took a fantastic mark as well that helped ice the game. George?
Yeah, the other thing I particularly liked about Fritter in this game was, I can't remember, it was in the first quarter when he was tapping the ball on along the wing, just a series of taps, just smart football, keeping the ball moving forward. I think he gained about 100 metres simply by doing that. But what I wanted to talk about Fritter was there's been everybody just sees him kicking goals, and that's fine, and he's done fantastically this year. There has been an absolute change in the way that he has played in the forward 50, and we'll just refer to the statistics here. Between round 1 and round 17, he had 22 tackles in total. He's had 23 since then.
Including 5 in this game.
Including 5 in this game. More importantly, from round 1 to 17, he had 8 tackles inside 50. He's had 14 since. He has completely changed the way that he's playing in the forward line. He's far more of a threat, apart from the fact that he's still kicking goals. We were talking about this earlier on in the season with problems with players like Melcham and him not putting enough pressure on the ball. But that's a complete change around for in the last 5 games from what happened in the first 17. So he's becoming a real threat to opposition. He's keeping the ball in there. These are the little things that suddenly you get more scoring opportunities that people are now expecting, but it's because of the work that Fritter's been putting in on his own, and there's probably others doing similar sorts of things. But he's certainly upped that portion of his game considerably. So nice to see, apart from the fact that he's kicked 50 goals in the season. When was the last time we had a player do that?
Tom McDonald in 2018, but a small forward.
What have the Romans ever done for it? That's such a good point, George. I was going to point that out about his tackles in this in 5. He was awesome. And a lot of them it's not just tackles. They use tackle to really impact a contest. And I mean, those numbers are terrific, aren't they, in terms of his turning that around? Because it sort of coincides with Terence calling in and giving him, questioning his intensity and his tackling, because since then he's been a inside 50 star, and not wanting to bring up a negative. In that same period, Melksham's had the opportunity to cement a position in this side, and the reason he hasn't is because he hasn't done exactly what Fritsch has done, which is got those tackle numbers up. So there's weeks where, every now and again there's still a drop Fritsch comment on Demonland. It's incredible to think that anyone would want to drop the player who's most likely to kick the goals. But in those matches where he hasn't kicked goals in the last 5, 6, 7 weeks, he's been tackling and putting pressure on, and so you've got to be doing both, don't you? And if you're not kicking goals and not providing pressure, well, that's why Wiedemann's not in the side, I think, and that's why Melksham's not in the side. And all power to Fritsch. The other thing about the forward line setup is, McDonald's been quiet. But he takes a player, Brown takes a player, they do lots of running, they create space. It creates a real matchup problem for them, because he's great one-on-one, he's got great hands, and the other thing, George, that you're spot on about is he's another natural footballer. Just the way he moves, his decision-making, and on top of all of that, he's become a really accurate kick for goal again. So, what a fantastic first final.
Yep. So Joel Smith, we don't need to talk about whether he was the right man to play on Charlie Cameron. We've sort of spoken about that. But where do you see his role going forward? Does he stay in the team if Hunt's back? which he may be since we've got a week off. His ankle might be right. Does he retain his spot? Does Hunt come back in? Do we go for a Hibberd type? Where do you see Joel Smith going forward? Either of you.
Me first, all right?
George, you go.
I was in two minds about this Joel Smith in this game. For a start off, I thought, gee, he's doing all right. He's playing all right. He's got intercept marks. Cameron's a hard player to play on. Like I said, who'd want to play on someone like that or Pickett? You're never going to completely keep them out of the game. And I looked at a series of his plays on the replay. The real difficulty in certainly three of those Cameron goals was he just got sucked into the ball and left Cameron on his own out the back.
Yeah, or pushed under the ball.
Or pushed, yeah. And the people saw the when Rivers handballed the ball to Cameron, and people say, oh, well, that wasn't Joel Smith's problem. Joel Smith actually came into the ball with Rivers and then realised he'd left Cameron out the back. But Rivers knew where Joel Smith was meant to be and handballed to him because, like Oliver, they know where they've got perception. They've got perception of where other players are on the ground. And Rivers was the same. He knew where Joel Smith was. So he handballed to where Joel Smith was, except that Smith had turned his back on the play and was going back to where he should have been in the first place on Cameron. Left Cameron all on his own to run into an open goal. So the same sort of thing happened a couple of times, just going into the contest when he shouldn't have been going into the contest. So I don't know what his future is going to be. And I think he might be similar to what we were talking about with Jordan. Depending on the opposition, whether you take the risk. I think he was in this game to play on Cameron simply because Cameron's fast. If the opposition haven't got that equivalent sort of player, I don't know that there's the role for him that we used him in this game. But at the end of the day, you're not going to stop Cameron if he kicks 3 or 4 or 5 goals. That's fine, but everybody's got to play their role, and some poor bunny's got to play on Cameron at some stage.
Well, who would have played on? Just say Hunt hadn't got injured and had been playing up until this week as well. Who would have played on Cameron this week? And Joel Smith hadn't come in the team to replace Hunt. Who do you guys think would have played on him?
May played on him last year. May could take him.
But you've got McStay in there. You've got
Rivers is probably the obvious one, but I mean it's interesting with Joel Smith. I think why they like him is because he adds such flexibility. Because George is saying that he was brought in this week to play on Cameron, and that was his role. The previous week he was brought in to play on one of the 3 tools and played on all 3 tools and Dangerfield against Geelong. So I agree. I think the sort of if we play a Geelong, for instance, then we need a 3rd tall. That's just how flexible he gives them options. My feeling is that that they'll want Hunt back in. It depends a little bit. If we play Geelong again, which we'd probably we're more likely to play Geelong. It might just be that Smith gets that job. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, and then Hunt gets brought in for the grand final. Because I think Hunt provides something that
take one week at a time
that we lack a little bit with that is, I mean, even this, maybe we don't because we had we scored brilliantly from the halfback flank, which as good as we've done all season from the halfback flank. And so obviously we've got some players doing run and carry, Bowie being one of them. But I think Hunt really provides that sort of dash and aggression and ability to get a handball, receive and run 20 metres really quickly and then release it. I mean, Rivers too. But I just think he provides that sort of weapon. But, as I said a few weeks ago, that's what I thought Smith might be playing, and he hasn't. But I think they just love his athleticism, and I don't think Hibberd's coming back in because Hibberd doesn't have that. Hibberd's one-dimensional in the sense that he's probably the one that would have played on Cameron, for instance, or has in the past. But where else does Hibbo play? He's not going to play on a tour.
Yeah. Right. Tom McDonald, second week in a row since his return from back injury, and that he hasn't had much impact. 4 possessions this week. I think he had 6 the week before. Is this a concern, or are you guys happy for him to provide that foil for Bailey Fritsch and Ben Brown? He still has to take a decent defender, and we just hope that he finds some form. Big man?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I've watched him a little bit. I'm not sure if he's done this previously as much as he's doing now, but he's doing a lot of blocking for Brown. The one I can't recall, maybe it's the goal that Brown missed in the third quarter, but it came from a really poor bit of play from Andrews to allow it to be blocked. But T-Mac completely just got in his way legally and allowed Brown to have a free run. And I noticed that he did that a lot. So I know that, you can't build a whole game around on blocking and defence. But, I guess the sort of bottom line is that he'll play the prelim, and I can't even imagine if there's no way. I can't see him getting dropped even if he had another low possession game in the prelim, because structurally they're committed to 3 talls. There's no way they're going to change that. He takes a defensive, you need to put a decent forward on him. You also need to put a tall, decent forward on him.
Defender.
Defender, I should say. Structurally, he's, it sounds a bit silly, but, I think he's super important. So he'd obviously want to, he'd be a bit sort of down on himself, no doubt, having such low numbers. I'm sure, if I haven't heard Goody say it, but I'm sure Goody would say, he's doing his job and he's doing his role. A couple of those goals we got, including the one, I forget who kicked it, but came from exactly that, of him marking and bringing the ball to the ground. And so it almost clunked it from the one I'm thinking of. Maybe it was Spargo, I think. And so I think, he's playing his role. I'm sure, though, they'd want him getting some more numbers. I don't know. I didn't see him running up the ground as much, George. Did you? Do you feel he played a bit differently?
I think in the second quarter he took a mark up sort of on the half back line, but that was about it that I saw.
Yeah, but I think it was what Bidman was talking about before. Tom was playing much more in the goal square type of arrangements, because Brown was running Harris Andrews, who everyone forgets is an All-Australian fullback. So Brown was allowed to run Andrews into the ground effectively, but Tom was just as equally important, so he wasn't doing that up the ground leading that he has done in the past. But you're right about the blocking. There was the Pickett's second goal, I think it was, that came from Tom McDonald operating in the ruck. He's not taking. He missed a couple of marks that he would have taken in the past, but as long as he's playing his role, like you said, he's got to play. You've got to put a tall forward on him. He does run long distances, so it's difficult for the defenders to play on him. And we see the effects when people like Spargo and Pickett and even Fritsch are snapping the ball as a result of these players bringing it to the ground. And the important thing is, who else are we going to bring in at this stage? It will be sheer madness to try and bring in another forward at this stage. Tom's doing exactly what he's needed to do. We're still scoring with all these other players. It's all about playing as a team, not just individuals. And
the other thing is that, he's definitely 100% he'll play in that prelim and the grand final too. There's no question in my mind at all. And on a positive side, he could have a really big prelim and or grand final. And so it's a positive that we've just beaten, qualifying final. We've won by 6 goals practically, could have won by 8. And we've had our, one of our top 5 players for the season have extremely quiet games. So, from a positive lens on that, we've got a fair few things that we can bring to the table in 2 weeks.
I like your confidence, Big Man. You keep talking about the grand final.
That's right. No,
come on, Andy, get on board.
Yeah, come on.
1 week at a time. We've got a caller on the line. I believe Terence is joining us. Terence, good evening or good morning where you are. How are you?
I'm doing well, Andy. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. Well, now we can't. Terence, you there? Terence, I think we've lost you. Just check that my cable isn't out. No, it's not. Terence, give us a call back in a minute. Hope it's not my cable. Doesn't seem to be.
We'll blame the Belgian NBN.
Yeah, it was like I was watching watching is not quite the right word. The Belgium Formula One last night. It was just raining non-stop for 6 hours before they finally called it off. So
well, maybe it's the rain. I'll wait to see if he comes back on. But while we're waiting for Terence to call back, we have a preliminary final coming up. Obviously, we're not going to do a preview now. We'll save that for next week. But I've consulted the finals predictor, and there's only 2 teams that we can play, and
the variables are reducing quite significantly for the D's, aren't they?
So it's only Geelong or GWS. Do you have a preference in terms of who you would like to play, and then also who do you think will win? Big man, I'll start with you.
Do I have a preference? I'm sick of playing Geelong, so...
Yeah. The law of averages says that they are due for a win against us.
I mean, I've said that of the teams outside the top 4, the one that I'm most concerned about is GWS.
Yeah, me
but
too.
I'm less concerned about them now because their horror run continues. I mean, obviously with a massive self own with, there's no way that he's not going to get weeks, Green. And, as significantly in terms of their chances going forward is the other Green has busted his arm or busted his wrist. And Cummins is out as well. So, they're going to struggle big time to beat Geelong. I think that, their game, the way they play and their, contested ball, so with Geelong, is got a better chance of beating us. I've said all along with Geelong, their game plan doesn't work for finals. And so what do? They change it at this late stage. They're not going to, you could argue, well, they almost beat us 2 weeks ago. They're running out of gas, just as George has been saying. I think they'll win this week. Who would I prefer to play? Probably GWS, to be honest, just because of their injuries and, they surely must be struggling to the finishing line now. The Mumford, there's even talk Mumford is not playing this week. He hasn't played. He's only played a consecutive game once all season. How's that? Sort of, they've got to work out whether he plays, and maybe that's going to gas him to play the prelim because he hasn't done it all season. You think Toby Green's going to get multiple weeks, so he's not going to play in a prelim. Green, I forget his first name, the other Green, the young player, he's out probably for the season, or definitely he's got a busted arm. So, that I would say if we had to GWS just because, their soldiers are dropping but in the ordinary run of things, probably them because they're damaging. Either way, I think that we've got both of those teams covered. And I think it's another example of the luck we've got this year, Andy, because suddenly with the way it's all worked out, with Brisbane having to play the Dogs, means that, the 4 best teams 4 weeks ago were us, Port Adelaide, the Dogs, and Geelong. And now one of those teams is going to get knocked out in a prelim or potentially before then. Or not necessarily in prelim. We'll get to, so you know what I mean? So yeah. Port will knock out one of them, or Port will get beaten. It couldn't have worked out better. So if you were looking at a tennis analogy, we're on the right side of the draw, having GWS or Geelong, because both of them are, they're barely getting to the finishing line there.
George? We do have Terence back on the line, but George, you go with the answer.
Yeah, I think at the moment I prefer to play Geelong, and a couple of weeks ago I thought GWS were the unknown factor in the finals competition, simply because they've got so much talent across every line and in every position. But Big Man's right. You take Toby Green out of that, you take a Mumford out of that, and they're going to have to play Mumford against Geelong. They can't not have him in there. So they might get Finlayson back this week, apparently, losing Tom Green as well. But if in the game against Sydney weren't fantastic at all, but Sydney basically came back from, 4 or 5 goals down in the last quarter. GWS had run out of steam.
Totally run out of steam.
Yeah, and I think that's their major problem, is that they go early, they go hard, but you've got to be able to run out the season. You've got to be able to run out the game, and I think that's their problem. Just as equally, I think Geelong's got exactly the same problem. I think playing in Perth, their problem will be they might get Zach Tui back, but you've got the old legs. Dangerfield's playing with a broken hand. It'll be on a big ground, and from our perspective, the psychological edge that they'll suffer from playing us again in round 23. So at this stage, I prefer to play Geelong simply from those reasons, but never underestimate GWS, because they've won games this season without Toby Green, when I thought they'd be complete losers. It's going to be interesting. But the good thing is that both of these teams are going to have to play the next final. It's going to be knock them down, drag them out.
Exactly. And cutthroat.
It will be cutthroat, yeah.
Both, Geelong have got this same thing. They've lost, 5 of their 6 lowest scores ever under Scott have been in finals.
Yeah.
So they've got all of that to come back. Historically they lose this final and then they win the next one, which they probably will. They'll certainly go in favourites with a bookie. But as you say, George, it's going to be, under Cameron in the last couple of years, I really like the way Giants go about their footy, but they've really dropped all of that orange tsunami rubbish, and they're just really a meat and potatoes contested ball footy team, and they'll look to smash Geelong. And the other thing about Geelong, they're going to miss their, they're one of their younger players. What's their Irish player? He did his hammy.
O'Connor.
Yeah.
Is it O'Connor who they've been using as a tagger? Mm-hmm. It's not just that. He's like a young player who can run. It's the last sort of player you want to take out of that team.
Yeah, so I think there's whoever comes out of this game as the winner will be really struggling without a break.
Without a break.
Coming up against Melbourne, who's just demolished effectively the 4th best side in the competition.
And just wants to play. That play, Stephen May was hilarious. He was asked about the break. He said, no, he'd rather just play the prelim this week.
Yeah.
Well, I'll talk to you about breaks and stuff, but let's get Terence on. He's been waiting patiently. Terence, can we hear you now?
I hope so, Andy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I have 3 points that I wanted to bring up. The first one, just to let you know that my MFCSS is in remission at the moment.
It never truly goes away.
Not only is that because we've been winning, but I think the thing for me, I don't know about you, Andy, but the thing for me is that the real concerns are we going to get up this week? Are we going to be competing this week? I think we've seen enough consecutive games where we are getting up, we are competing, and I mean this week was just terrific. So it's not just the hype of having won against Geelong and having won against Brisbane. It is having that confidence that when we go onto the park, that we are going to play the game we're expected to play. So I'm really encouraged by that. But like you, 1 week at a time, I'm not thinking grand finals just yet. The second point was with skills, and you aficionados probably see this all the time, but I was really impressed. It was the last quarter. I think it was the last quarter when Fritsch kicked a goal. They were right out on the boundary. One of the players, I thought it was... sorry, I'm going to forget his name now, so it doesn't matter. But when the ball came in from the boundary line, they bounced the ball just in a skills way, and then Fritsch the same. Fritsch was bent over. He just quickly bounced the ball, not in a traditional bounce, but the way the ball skills he had to just be able to bounce the ball slightly, pick it up and then get his balance and then kick the goal, I thought was just really amazing. So some of those skills that we see from our guys, And I'm not saying that Melbourne does it exclusively, but I've seen that a couple of times in recent weeks where there's just got so much control in the way that they're dealing with a loose ball. I'm just really impressed. And similarly, with Brayshaw, not only did I think he played a terrific game, but one of the things I noticed, again, I think it was in the last quarter, he was going into a contest. And I was really impressed by the fact that he was looking around him to see, what that contest was going to look like. And it's not so much that he pulled out, but given his the possibility of having head clashes and so on with his concussion, I was really impressed with how smart he was, the way that he ultimately ended up going into that contest and making sure that he wasn't leading with his head. So that was pretty good. And then the last one before I let you go is I have a bit of a soft spot for the Lions. My grandmother, one of my grandmothers followed the Lions, so I've been watching them over the last few years and enjoying their success. I was happy we won on Saturday, of course, but I was really disappointed with how dirty they are.
Matheson.
Matheson, you just expect that from, but Dane Zorko. I mean, we know Dane Zorko is a bit of a hothead, but as captain, the way that he pushed Clarry over backwards, and really, I guess he was hoping that Clarry would bite. I mean, Clarry responded; he wasn't going to put up with that crap. But the way that he did that, and then Danaher. I mean, I kind of like Danaher, but he's just a big kid. But the way that he got stuck into the smallest guy on the ground in Bowie, and I was really pleased that our guys stood up. I mean, there have been years gone by when some of our players have been set upon like that, and we don't respond. So I was really impressed with the way that everyone, including May, Gawn and so on, I mean, our big body guys who basically said, that's just not suitable behaviour. And then Clarry got, and even the commentator said with the ex-Hawthorn player who crashed into his back, that was needless for him to do that. And then, I don't know about you guys because we didn't see the television vision, but Clarry ended up on his hands and knees, not only with the back one, but later on, again, I think it was the last quarter. As far as I could tell, the body language was saying he was either punched in the stomach or was hit in the balls. I mean, one of the two, but I mean, he was really bent over and really in pain. And now nothing came of that and no one saw it, I guess because it wasn't on the TV vision. But, I mean, that kind of behaviour is just really unacceptable. Thoughts, MFC, skills and dirty Lions. I'll take it on that. I'll let you go.
Thanks, Terence. I always appreciate the call. Dirty Lions.
I thought it's interesting because they sort of known for trying to rough up oppositions, and it was pointed out a couple of weeks ago they did it to the Suns, I think I really like the way that Melbourne don't get into that stuff, and again it goes back a bit to that discipline. Melbourne have been really disciplined this season, and I think it's a sort of a thing to easily missed in some respect. And maybe underrated as a thing that we bring to the table, because someone like Vining, a mate of mine pointed out that, he's a tough, aggressive player like Zorko is, but never crosses the line. Like apart from the fact that when he gets suspended for 2 weeks.
Except when he tried to choke someone out.
But, it's controlled aggression, and it's generally in the tackle and the way he goes about it. But Zorko is a sniper who loses his temper, and, Matheson, I reckon it's remarkable how, what you can get away with on a footy field and what you can't get away with on the footy field. So let's take that example of Viney getting 2 weeks for the, it caused uproar. Everyone's jumping on it. Matheson, the way he ran into Gawn, is much more likely to cause serious injury than what Viney was doing. And he didn't even get reported. No, as far as I know, Matheson never had his eye on the ball, completely curled himself up into a ball. The only player that was going to get hurt in that contest was Gawn. And Gawn is really lucky he didn't get seriously hurt, because he got hit right across the midriff, didn't expect it. He also did a couple of other things as well, Matheson. So, that's 1980s style footy. And I don't reckon it's a great look for the Lions to have the captain, as Terence has pointed out, who's got an anger management issue, would it seem, and then bringing on Medi sub like Matheson, who just goes the knuckle.
Never trust a guy who gives himself a nickname.
Yeah.
Like Bin Man or George?
Well, they're monikers, not nicknames.
Yeah, we didn't do, what's his self-appointed nickname?
The barometer.
The barometer. Well, his barometer must have been broken because he didn't do he had the whole game to change their fortunes and didn't do anything.
Yeah.
The really good thing about that point that Terence raised was while they were playing dirty, it was our reactions that, when Danaher tried to rough up Bowie, he was quickly put in his place by May and the others. So sending the message straight away, you can't get away with that sort of thing. But even when Max was assaulted, that he just picked up the ball and just delivered it straight down the other end of the ground. That sends an even bigger message back to them. Don't try that mucking around with us. We'll show you what playing football's all about.
And it's not going to work.
It's not going to work. And while I don't know that we'll get it in the preliminary final, you can absolutely guarantee that Port Adelaide will do something along similar lines, particularly from someone like a Charlie Dixon if we're in the grand final against them.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, George, is that if they have a strategy, it was the Suns, I'm sure, and they went out to sort of knock them off their tucker, so to speak, and it's just not going to work against us. So why waste your energy doing it? And they tried it in the first time they played us this season, and if anything, it just it was grist to our mill, and we ran away with it. But I like the way too that disciplined, as you say, Gawn just got on with it, and he was asked about it in his post match on the ground. Because I think he got crunched right near the end. And he refused to get baited in that moment into, he made some joke about missing it or something. So, they're not getting, they're knocked off their sort of line at all. And that thing where, of all players, Danaher, bloody, having a go at Bowie, what's the, like, come on. But the look on May's face was priceless, just fantastic. It was, he sort of had a combined, I'm aggressive and I'm about to floor you, and sort of consternation on his face. Like, what are you doing? He's only a short young player. So, I thought that was really positive as well.
All right, let's move on to the All-Australian team, the Coaches Award, the Rising Star, and perhaps we'll start with the All-Australian team. It was a fantastic night for the D's. 5 players in the All-Australian team on the ground, all 5 players well-deserved. Lever, May in the back line, Max and Clarry in the midfield, Petracca on a forward flank. Just a fantastic night. To top it off, I wasn't even thinking about this at the time, but then when they were going to announce the captain, I said, Max, he's a very good chance to get captain, and he is Australia's captain. George, thoughts on All-Australian selection?
Yeah, I think that was a fair summation. Usually there's a couple of contentious ones in the All-Australian side, who should have been there, who shouldn't have been there, and things like that. But certainly from the Melbourne perspective, I think I said last week that I would anticipate 5 out of the 7 that were nominated, and that was the case. Simply because they were such standouts at each of those positions, you just simply couldn't put anybody else in there. So what's really promising is when you look back a couple of years at when Richmond were winning their flags, this was the same sort of scenario that they faced. They had multiple All-Australians, no doubts. They won Coaches Awards, they won Rising Stars, and they won Brownlow medals with those particular players. So this is the All-Australian team really adds evidence to that, what we've been saying all year, that we are, without a doubt, the best team in the competition at the moment. We've got the players who are performing at high levels compared to anybody else. It really wasn't surprising in a way that we had 5 nominations for that.
Remind me again, Andy, who were the 2 that didn't make it?
Salem and Bailey Fritsch.
Right. Fritsch has gone from strength to strength, as you were pointing out, George. He's added that intensity and tackling pressure to his impressive goal kicking. that must be what, fourth or fifth in the Coleman, 51 goals or 50 for the season.
Yeah, he's up there. I don't have the.
For a small forward, he must have been pretty close to making that side. It's remarkable to think that of who would have thought 12 months ago Fritsch would be in the, seriously in the argument to make All-Australian, and Salem would have made it halfway through the season. He was a lock at that point, you would have thought, and he dropped off with his injury in his groin and hasn't been as influential as he was, probably because the opposition are putting time into him. But he's close as well. So there was a great scene at the end where May got brought off, and speaking of consternation, I think it's 5 minutes to go when he was running past the interchange bench, and Burgess, who had furiously been tapping away on his laptop and trying to get, yelling at players, getting his loads right and all of that, no doubt. He's obviously told Steve May to come off the ground, and Steve May was like, he didn't want to come off the ground. Like, the game's done and dusted, 5 minutes to go. He was not wanting to leave and didn't look totally happy about it.
Because he probably didn't want Danaher to get a goal. He wanted probably to keep him goalless.
Yeah, well, no, probably exactly. I mean, so competitive. Yeah. When he came off the ground, then there was him, Gawn, Lever, Oliver and Petracca.
An All-Australian bench.
Yeah, that's all Australian. That's about 12 All-Australian caps all up, or jackets or whatever you call them. That's a pretty impressive bench, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
And I was thinking, that's one to please all the Demon fans. If it was at the MCC, there'd be whole sections of the MCC, that game was the MCG yelling, get Maxi off, get Track off, get Steve off, take everyone off.
Absolutely. So that's all Australian. We then come to the Coaches Award, and I'm so happy that Clayton Oliver won that award. Thoroughly deserved it. I really hope he gets a Brownlow medal in a couple of weeks. I'm not sure. I think the umpire's favourite son, Bontempelli, might pinch it. I think some votes might get stolen off Oliver from other D's players, but I'd love him to win a Brownlow as well. But well-deserved Coaches Award.
Yeah, great speech too. He's such a country lad, isn't he? And it was probably his most together speech. It's no doubt he had it written in front of him on his Zoom account. Pro tip: read it straight from your computer screen. Has he become close to he's in the conversation now for the best player in the AFL, and he wasn't at the beginning of the season. He's added everything that he needed that we talked about at the beginning to go to that very, very elite level. These numbers are one thing, but it's how often he's moving the ball forward, how aggressive he is in, he's winning the ball and causing havoc with it. Compare his game to Neil's. 46 possessions, extraordinary in an AFL game of footy, but which game, who would get the 3 votes? I mean, him in a heartbeat for that. And I think there's a fair argument to say he's the best player in the AFL right at the moment. He's kicking goals finally. He's taking leadership. He's been extraordinary the last 4 weeks.
I think it's important with the Coaches Awards. It's out of all of these recognition awards, all Australian coaches, Rising Star, and also the Brownlow, is that the Coaches Award is the one that is voted on by the people who know what's going on. The All-Australians by a panel of former footballers who probably don't know what's going on these days to a certain extent. But the coaches and the Brownlows voted on by the umpires who've got certainly less knowledge. But the Coaches Award's all about not just the winning side's coach, but also the losing side's coach. They can recognise the dangerous players on the field. They know the ones who are doing exactly what they need to do. They know exactly the ones that they wish were on their side. And so to win that one, to win that award by particularly so much is a real credit, and tells you that, like Ben Mans just said, he is easily the best player in the competition at the moment.
And I think, George, the thing that really indicates is that the coaches value the work that players do defensively. So I'll bet my bottom dollar that the year that in 2018 when Gus came third in the Brownlow, I bet you he came nowhere in the coaches' vote because he wasn't doing work defensively. He was getting lots of possessions, getting them underneath the feet of the umpires. That's the model for the Brownlow. And Oliver, was always a high possession player too. But, apart from his, kicking goals and his decision making, the thing that he's really added to his game that's brought him to this level, and he says that he talks about it himself, is his work defensively. And also his discipline not to go to the contest all the time, to sit outside and be a receiver, to be an offensive outside player, is bring that into his game as well. He's so much more balanced. But the key thing in his game, I reckon, all of that aside, is how much better he is defensively. He runs both ways. He's super fit. He's making those desperate 1%ers. He's chasing even though it looks like he's got no chance to get them. He's become the all-round player, and I agree, George, that he's extraordinary, the way he's gone to this next level.
2018, Max won the Coaches Award. Oliver was our next one, and I can't see on the list of 15 or 16 players, Brayshaw is not there.
Yeah, there you go.
And I didn't have enough time to go through every round and count up how many votes he had, but it's safe to say he probably wasn't up there. Then we come to the Rising Star. There have been 11 judges, including Gillon McLaughlin, Kevin Bartlett, Glenn Jakovich, Andrew Dillon, Nick Rewalt, Jude Bolton, Chris Johnson, Cameron Ling, Matthew Richardson, Warren Treadray and Kevin Sheehan, who give 5, 4, 3, 2, 1s. 9 of them have had Luke Jackson as the 5 votes. Jude Bolton had Luke as the 4th, with Tom Green ahead of him. But Chris Johnson, I don't know how much of Luke Jackson he's seen, but he had him with 2 votes. And Jackson has run away with it, 51 votes to Tom Green, 38 votes. George, worthy winner?
Based on what I hear Chris Johnson when he's commentating, that wouldn't surprise me. I don't think he knows what's going on the ground at all these days. But, yeah, I think once again that this was a lay-down misère, to use the old card quote. Playing so many games over the season, being an individual on the ground who just attracts attention because of his size and his athleticism, will certainly garner you a lot more votes than perhaps others would. But he's still delivering with his skills. He really is a complete standout. Someone like, I think, Tom Green finished second in this. He's much more of an inside grunt type of player. But Jackson is a complete and utter standout, and at this stage, for the role that he's playing in the ruck, it is quite incredible. You can understand how, even a Tom Green can get a job in the midfield, but to be a ruckman at this age, at the age of 19, and win such an award is really incredible.
And the other thing that's amazing about his age, George, is can you think of a player who would be the last player at that age, in his second year of AFL football, who would be as important piece of puzzle in a team's chances of winning a flag? He's super important to our chances of winning a flag this year. And none really come to mind immediately. I'm sure there's some, but to have that influence, it's not just to be the rising star. And I mean, that's one thing, but it's his importance tactically in the team, structurally in the team, and the fact that he's getting better week on week. He's adding marking now, like that mark he took over the pack. He's going to be taking 3-4 marks like that a match. It's really easy to forget how young he is. But if he was a key forward, for instance, the 2 King brothers are both in their second season as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
They were last year, weren't they? They were drafted So they're both in their second season. Neither are impacting the game the way he is. I mean, they're both really good players, but, they weren't even in the conversation for the Rising Star. His numbers aren't massive, but really important to our chances of winning a flag this year. The only thing I'd say about him winning is the problem with being a punter is punters lament, and could have got 15s on him at the beginning of the season for that award, 20s, because all the money was for the Suns player. What's his name? The redhead.
Oh, Raoul.
Rao, yeah. So he was like 250 or something to start the season, but that obviously an injury through that. So, but he was unbackable at the end. It was $1.20, or sorry, $1.10 before on the day of the Rising Star, Jackson.
Last year, Max King came third in the Rising Star, behind Sarong and Anderson. Anything else, boys?
I think that's about all from us, Andy. I was talking to you briefly before the program about the change in expectations, and I was thinking in this particular game that we've just played, I was worried why I was anxious before the game, and then I thought it out that when I look back at past final series that we played in 87, 88, 2000, 2018. In all of those final series, we all hoped that we would win because, in all honesty, deep down, we knew that teams like Hawthorn and Essendon and West Coast were just that so much further ahead of us than what we were at that time. That it was a hope that we would win. Whereas what's changed in this year is we hope that we don't lose because we are the best side in the competition. So it's completely changed the approach to finals. It's the first time I've ever felt this way.
Yeah, and a similar sort of thought that I was saying just before we jumped on that in some ways it's worked out. Again, another bit of luck is that we had that high emotion of the Geelong game. And in some ways this felt a little bit of a letdown's not quite the right word, but it was a professional win almost. Is exactly like I said, George. The team expected to win. The fans expected us to win, and we went out and did the job. And they didn't celebrate that hard after that, But making the finals, our first finals win in 2018, they were cock a hoop after that Geelong game. So I think that we to have that energy out of the way from that sort of really high energy in round 23 and have a calmer first final really is worked out fantastic for us. And in the chat room, Clint Biscuit, the very first comment in the chat room tonight was the difference between getting into a prelim in 2018 versus this year. It's completely different, isn't it? And we were already in the prelim. We still had a match to go in 2018. But the energy is completely different.
What are your thoughts before we go on whether there should be another break, considering now that we've had a break, our own break because we got into the preliminary? Do you want them just to play through the year?
Totally, if they can.
Forgetting the COVID situation and just trying to get the season over as quickly as possible before anything shuts anything down, which I don't think. I think they'd play in front of zero crowd to get it done.
If they don't have a bye before the grand final and we make the grand final, and so I'm not there yet, so if we win the prelim and they go straight to a grand final, that's a massive advantage for us given how fit we are, given how few injuries we are. That is huge for us. It was huge already, massive advantage, and a fair one too. I thought, that preseason bye, the pre-finals bye just should totally become part of history. And we deserve that advantage and we got it. And as George pointed out, Geelong desperately needed a week's break and it showed, didn't it, in their game against Port. They were listless.
I think the AFL were keeping that bye up their sleeve in case something should happen. Western Australia had 2 COVID cases during the week, and that might have generated more discussion on the bye or not. But if that's in control, which it seems to be, I think the AFL will just go straight through because they can't afford for something to happen in that last week. So if it's available and ready to go, then I think they'll just go straight through with it. I think the other danger for them is, or the other thing that they have to face up to is, as apart from we get the break now, you don't want to be giving a benefit to teams that are finish lower on the ladder coming into the grand final or the preliminaries by giving them another break. We're the ones, and Port Adelaide are the ones who gain the advantage by finishing up first and second on the ladder. We shouldn't be disadvantaged as a result of it. So I think they'll go straight through.
Are both games next week at Optus Oval?
No, the Brisbane are playing in Brisbane. So the only thing that could cause troubles,
I was about to say that's the issue, isn't it? Because
COVID. Is COVID in Queensland, or then after the preliminary COVID in South Australia, there would then necessitate quarantine for the Port going into a grand final.
No, they don't need to, because South Australia.
I'm saying if there's COVID in South Australia.
Yeah. So the issue is the Dogs will have to fly directly to either team who win will have to fly directly to Perth for it to be possible, because they've played a Victorian team, Brisbane, so they'll need to do 2 weeks isolation, as I understand it, in Western Australia and Bulldogs. So I presume both teams will fly directly to.
Well, it's not 2 weeks. It's like what we did before we played West Coast a couple of weeks ago. It's sort of that lead up to it.
No, I think it's 2 weeks now.
Oh, really?
That's why we're there. That's why we're there now.
Well, that's right.
The media's there.
So what happens? Bulldogs, if Bulldogs beat Brisbane, or they go to South Australia.
It'll have to be 7 days. That's right. So they'll fly directly out. Right. So it'll be 7 days for them.
Well, they'll go to South Australia and spend a week there, and presumably that's part of it. But I'd say play through.
Yeah, play through.
All right. Well, there you go. All right, boys. Thank you, George. Thank you, Bin Man. Thank you, Terence, for calling in. Thank you to all the fellas in the chat room. We'll be back next week. We'll discuss. We'll do a show. We'll discuss the upcoming preliminary final. What a time to be alive for a D supporter. Go D's.
Go Red Legs.
Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons.